Welcome to Success Weekly with James Tharris, a weekly dose of thought-provoking ideas and helpful tips on improving your mindset. And now, here's your host, James Tharris.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Success Weekly. I'm your host, James Tharris, and this week we are going to be talking about more keys to success. The goal of this podcast is to help give you the keys, and there are many, many keys. Some of the keys are larger and open more doors, but some of them are smaller keys and open up doors that are very difficult to get to unless you have the specific key. So one of those keys this week is going to be the key of delegation. Delegation is basically getting your efforts done through, or getting your work done through the efforts of other people. So in a very simple sense, that's what it is. So we have to, before we go any further, we have to distinguish the difference between delegation and abdication, which is sometimes and unfortunately too often confused with delegation. You see, abdication is when you give somebody a project and tell them something to do, and then it's theirs, and you don't ever check in on them. You don't help to mentor them or teach them or give them any feedback, and it's basically their project. Well, that may work in certain circumstances, but in many circumstances, it's one of the keys to failure. So before you abdicate anything to anyone, you have to make sure that you've done a great deal of delegating first. So delegating is basically giving somebody the opportunity to do something and prove certain skills, and maybe they discover certain skills that they don't even realize they've got. So if let's say you are the manager of a football team, or let's say a baseball team, or any kind of team, I guess. Let's just say it's a football team since we're in the football season now. And you happen to be the manager, and you can see the mistakes that the quarterback is making. So instead of trying to communicate to the quarterback what you'd like to have done, you say to yourself, well, if it's going to be done right, I have to do it. And you put on your helmet and your gear, and you run out in the field and you bench your quarterback so that you can show that quarterback how it's supposed to be done. You don't often see that happen, and in fact, I don't think I've ever seen it happen, at least in high school football or the NFL. It may have happened someplace else, but I just can't think of an instance. So nonetheless, you just don't see that happen, because if the coach then becomes the quarterback and starts running the plays, even if he's very, very successful at that position and starts helping the team to win, what is he not able to do? Well, he's not able to observe the other players and the other team and the other coach, and to see where some of the other holes in the bucket might be. So he basically puts himself in a position and is really stuck or resigned there until he steps out of that position again. Let's say that then all of a sudden, as the quarterback, he starts to see that his linebackers failing to provide adequate coverage for him, and he starts getting sacked a few times. So he decides to say, okay, you go have a seat, and I'll do both positions. As you can see, that would be insanity. There is no way that coach could play the coach, the quarterback, and the linebacker all at the same time. So what the coach has to do is to step back and take an objective look at things and say, okay, let's try this person in this position and see how he does in this position. And if he's not performing well, we'll make some adjustments first. And if that doesn't work, then we'll remove him and put somebody else in that position and see how that person does. We're going to essentially delegate the responsibilities of that particular position on the team to a person or a couple of people and observe them. We're not just going to say it's all yours, make it happen. We're going to observe them, and we're going to see if they need any additional training or help or coaching. And we're going to take notes, and then we're not going to stop them every time they make a mistake. We're going to take notes on things that maybe we need to talk to them about in the future, things that maybe we didn't train them on or teach them properly enough in the past, and we say, okay, these are things that are going to happen next week during training. But today, here's the 2 or 3 big things that I see that this guy needs to fix in order to make it happen. So then we'll call a timeout. The players will come in. We'll tell, as the coach, you'll tell everybody what they're doing great, and here's some of the holes I'm seeing. Do this, and do this, and I think we can still win. The players then, whatever they do, clap hands and whatever, and go back to the game. And they take that advice with them, and they either act on the advice or they choose to ignore the advice. If the advice is ignored and it results in a negative outcome for the next play, then they come back in with the coach, and the coach basically, reads them the riot act and sends them back out in the field and tells them to execute the plan that they just talked about. If they execute the plan and they're successful, they get a high five and kudos, and maybe they even win the game. If they go out and execute the plan and it doesn't work, well, at least the coach, the person that's best suited for calling these plays and coming up with the plays, at least for a time being, he will or she will have to be the person that the other players look to, because the coach is the one that's standing back and is able to observe the entire field and see where the major problems are, where each of the players are pretty well stuck in their positions and they're focused on executing their own mission, and it's a teamwork environment. So every position on the team is to really help facilitate one or two things, and that is to protect the quarterback and allow the quarterback a few moments to make a decision as to whether to pass or run or punt or whatever it is they're going to do. So each one of them, if they're operating at their full capacity and thinking about being team members, will help their quarterback accomplish their mission a lot easier. Now, is that a guarantee that if all those things happen that they're going to be successful? Nope, it never is. There are really no guarantees. We just don't know. Sometimes we get onto a field with a team that's slightly better than us in every way. They're slightly outperforming us and outthinking us, and they've been out training us, or they've maybe got some extra talent that we don't have. And these things can affect the outcome of a game. But if we learn as leaders, and you're a leader if you have the following going on. If you're a bigger brother or bigger sister, you're leading your little brother or little sister. If you're an older cousin, you're leading your cousins. If you're an older friend, you're leading your friends. If you're a friend that other people look to for advice and they ask your opinions, you are a leader. If you are a parent, you have kids, you are a leader. If you're a teacher and you have students, you are a leader. So learning these skills of delegation can help you in your team just as it can help somebody on a football team. So let me give you a few ideas of how delegation or practicing delegation can really, really help you become more successful. See, as a martial arts instructor, when I first started out, it was just me. There were 3 people involved in my business, me, myself, and I. And I had to do everything. I had to open the school. First I had to find the place where I was going to have the school. I had to negotiate the lease. I had to get the keys to the door. I had to decorate the interior and the exterior. And I had to set up the classes. I had to do all the marketing and the advertising. I had to do my own training. I had to teach every class. I had to answer every phone call. I had to teach every introductory class. I had to sell every piece of martial arts gear and equipment to students. I had to enroll students. I had to have conferences with students who were misbehaving at home or at school, or having difficulty with their grades. Or behavior with their brothers or sisters. I had to break up arguments on the floor. I had to talk to parents that were upset because their child wasn't going to be able to take the test. I had to talk to parents about when their child wasn't ready and maybe they failed a test, and I had to kind of coach them through that process. And so basically I did it all. And there was a limit to how much I could grow when I was doing it all. Now I still enjoy doing it all. I'm a very hands-on person and really, really love to be in control and do things on my own terms and in my own way. But the longer I do that, the less I'm able to grow. So the longer that I did what I explained there with my school, the more I stayed at a very small level. I had 20 students at one point, and that's about all I could handle by doing everything myself. The first time I delegated something to one of my students, which was essentially having one of my senior ranking students continue the class when the phone rang, and I was able to go answer the phone then and spend an extra 2 minutes on the phone because I had somebody handling that class for me, versus me saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm right in the middle of class. Can I get your name and number and I'll call you back when class is finished?" which is what I had to do in the very beginning. But once I was able to begin delegating to the right people, by the way, not just anybody and everybody, but the right people, I was able to free up more time for myself to begin having more meaningful conversations on the phone with people. and which then turned into having them actually show up and them actually enjoying the process and enrolling in the school. So I ended up, instead of 20 students, I had 30 or 40 students. And then I started to delegate other parts of my business. I would find somebody who would be interested in cleaning for me, so that when I opened, I could, while they were cleaning, I could be doing preparing the lesson plans for the day instead of having to do it the night before and losing sleep. Or I was able to answer a phone call or do an outgoing phone call from somebody that I was speaking to the day before or 2 days ago, and following up with them. Things that I couldn't do when I was stuck in the position of teaching classes once the classes began. And then I learned how to delegate another part of my school to somebody else. And finally, I found somebody that was very good at interpersonal skills and relationship skills, and they were able to begin answering the phones for me, which then freed me up to go and teach even better classes and spend more time. So I had 2 or 3 places where I was delegating, and each time that I did this, I delegated, but I didn't just abdicate. I didn't just turn it over to these people. I delegated, and then I created a Monday morning staff meeting where I would then go in and I would give coaching details. While I was teaching, I would be listening with one ear or half of an ear to the person answering the phone, and I would hear 2 or 3 mistakes that they made. But rather than running over and trying to rescue that call, I let them make the mistakes, and I made a mental note of it. And then during that Monday meeting, we would role play, and we would come back to that phone call, and when they did the same thing, I would then correct those mistakes for them and help them become even better in their position of answering the phone. I would do the very same thing with the person who was taking over the class for me and telling them what they should be doing if I step off the floor and how to continue it so that there's no break in continuity, and the class continued on as if I was right there. And I would do the same thing with every other position that I delegated somebody with. Delegated to somebody. As far as cleaning, I might tell them, hey, make sure you pull the benches out and the chairs out and get back there as well, so that I noticed some dust and some things under there. Or make sure that after classes are over, check the toilet paper and the soap dispenser so that we're not running low, and so on and so forth. And eventually, I found people that I could trust to teach specific segments in my school. For instance, I taught somebody to take over my Little Ninjas class, which is the ages 3 to 6 years old. So that freed me up to do even more focus on teaching and making the school better in ways that I didn't have time to do before. And eventually then I found somebody to replace me in teaching beginner students. In fact, the first replacement was intermediate students, and then the beginner students. And then I found somebody to replace me full-time on the floor, which completely freed me up to increase our marketing efforts, our communication efforts, and our development of our professional side of our business. And I became more of a manager than I did a doer. Now, I still did, and I still do. In fact, right now, at the time of this podcast, I'm back in the trenches, really just my wife and I doing everything again. And the thing is, though, we know how to delegate, and at some point we are going to pull people in and delegate specific tasks to free us up to make this location thrive just the way our Indianapolis location is thriving right now. So the very first thing that delegation allows you to do is it allows you to free up your time for planning and organizing. So let's say you are a parent and you've already done this before. You delegate to your older child to help your younger one get their shoes on. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to make sure that their lunch is packed and that their book bags are ready and homework is done and other things are done like that, and facilitate the path that you're going to take, the travel path to getting from your house to school, and checking the weather and checking the traffic to see if there's any problems that you might need to make a different choice as far as your directions go, those kind of things. So you've got to learn to do the delegating in other areas of your life as well, which will then free you up for time for planning and organizing. So if you are planning as a family, you might be planning college education and how to save for that. You might be planning vacations. You might be planning your career moves and advancements. And you may be planning other things that build bonds between you and your spouse or you and your children. And if you're strictly doing everything that needs to be done in the house, you're not going to have the time or energy to be planning and organizing these other things. All right, so another thing that it helps you to do is helps you to learn how to manage and develop people. So as a parent, isn't that exactly what you're trying to do, is to manage your children and then manage their lives and help develop them into leaders and successful people? Well, of course you are. If you're any kind of parent, you want your child to be much more successful than you were when you were growing up. And you know some of the things that if you'd been shown or told or taught properly, that you know how that could have affected your life, and you may even feel like you could have been further along in life as well. So that's what delegation allows you to do. All right. It also allows you to keep yourself from spreading yourself too thin. So as I mentioned with the quarterback analogy and the coach, if he spreads himself too thin by getting in there and trying to do all these activities, number one, he's going to have an exercise in futility. It's impossible to do it all yourself. He's going to become very frustrated and frazzled because nobody understands what he understands, and he's not going to be able to, on the fly, get that out to them without giving them training. And he's going to basically burn himself out or herself out. So delegation allows you to keep yourself from spreading yourself too thin. It also encourages open communication and trust by those people that you are delegating to. So when I delegated my very first task to somebody, I trusted them to do it. I watched them, and I didn't make too many corrections unless it was something that I felt like I could correct very quickly and teach them on the fly, but not very often. I would see 1 or 2 or 3 things that I could maybe do that with, and then 10 other things that I say, okay, I can see where we're going to need to spend some time training. So that allowed them to open up their communication and trust with me, knowing that I wasn't going to basically be jumping on their case every time they started something. And that's sometimes, unfortunately, that's what happens between spouses, is one spouse will ask another spouse, will you please do something? And then when the other spouse starts to do it, the other spouse then all of a sudden jumps on their back and says, no, don't do it like that, do it like this. And then that kind of ruins the communication and trust on the other spouse's part. So it kind of breaks communication down and closes trust off. So if you learn to delegate properly, and when you delegate, you give some freedom, you give some room for errors, and when you do that, it might lead you to another benefit, which is you might learn a better way of doing things. When I was answering phones, for instance, in my school, I was pretty good at it. I was able to get people to come in. But when I delegated that to somebody that I could automatically tell, not automatically, I could immediately tell they were better one-on-one with people, and I could hear them over the phone, I thought, wow, this person really knows how to answer the phones and get results. They're getting twice the amount of people to show up. Wow, maybe I could learn a few things from that. And then when I listened to them and picked up a few things, I would add them into my own phone calls, and son of a gun, I started getting better results. I was the person that taught that originally, but you know what? You're never too old to learn something from somebody new or somebody that maybe you've taught to. I tell you what, I've learned things from my own kids and my own students so much more than I probably taught them. So it does go both ways as long as we're open-minded. So it can show you a better way. It also helps to motivate and build morale. When you delegate things to people, people are looking for a way to belong to something. People want to know that they have input into something. They want to know that they have a purpose in an organization. And if you give them a purpose by delegating certain responsibilities to them, it can really motivate them and help to build morale on the entire team. Again, going back to the football analogy, imagine that if you are the second string or maybe even third string quarterback, and you basically got to play the bench for the entire season, and unless the main quarterback got injured, you got out there one time. Well, let's say that this season, the quarterback never had any injuries. There was no reason to pull him off, and you sat on the bench the entire time with absolutely nothing to do. How much motivation would you have going into the following season? Well, that's a rhetorical question, and I guarantee the motivation would be much less than if the coach had delegated something to that third or fourth string quarterback to have them doing something and still have a place on the team and something to contribute. So delegating develops motivation and builds morale. It also encourages and stimulates creativity. One of the things that I delegated to one of my employees in Indianapolis was some of the creative side of our Facebook. And I gave her a couple of ideas and even a list of things that she could do. And try this and try that and make sure you do this, that, and the other. And I went through and fully explained, probably on 8 or 10 different occasions, to really make sure that she understood what it was I was trying to get across. I didn't just abdicate and say, here, do this. I gave her the tools to use and even gave her some things of my previous postings and things, and these are great ideas. And now I've watched her really take that and run with it with her creativity and her initiative. It's pretty awesome to watch, to sit back and see some of the posts that come out and go, wow, I might steal that one myself, because of the very the big amount of trust I put into her in the beginning and the training I've given her along the way, I've helped to hopefully encouraged to stimulate some creativity in her, and she seems to have really understand that concept now and is doing magnificently with it. So, and along those same lines, delegation can also help a person build skills. So I just mentioned the skills that this young lady developed in the Facebook arena. She's also developed many skills with enrolling students, getting students to come in, and this was a gal that didn't have any of this kind of experience before I started to train her on this. And she's now gone on to become a very well sought after person outside of our school by other people that want her to come work for them because of the skills that she developed. And the reason she developed them was because in the beginning I wasn't afraid to delegate and give her these responsibilities and help her grow and help mentor her and help her develop these skills. And now her skills are on a whole different level. So congratulations to her, and it all comes back to the being willing to delegate. All right. It also allows them to contribute significantly to team success. And so with her, I think that's one of her hot buttons is having the ability to realize that you had a part, or she had a part in the success of this particular person's experience at our school, or in this person's journey towards black belt in our program, or whatever it might be, or having a certain number of students in our program. She gets to feel the contribution to that, and that is very, very powerful. All right, and finally, delegation will benefit your team, your department, and your organization. So as I mentioned, your team can be the people that you work with or you work for, the people that are in your circle of friends and family. If you're, as I mentioned, if you're a bigger brother or bigger sister, your little brother and little sister, or little sisters, whatever you have, those are your team members. Your team will benefit when you allow them to ascend a little bit, and that's what delegation also does. It's kind of a side benefit. It allows them to have just a little bit of authority, and we all like to have a little bit of authority. So when you give them a little bit of authority over a project or over a specific task, and you don't dictate to them exactly how it needs to be done, you give them a little room for error, and then you continue to coach them and train them, magnificent things will happen in your organization, whether your organization is 1 or 2 people or it's 500 people. Learn to delegate, and you will learn to be more successful, and you will see a heck of a lot more success than maybe what you're seeing right now. So if you've had trouble delegating in the past, maybe you weren't delegating, maybe you were doing more abdicating, or maybe you weren't delegating, maybe you were doing more, telling people what to do and how to do it, and kind of nitpicking, I guess would be the best term for that, and less delegating. So when you delegate, learn how to give the other person opportunities for errors, just like you and I have had, but then coach them and train them how to not make the same errors in the future, and you will see your success soar. All right, until next week, this is James Ferris saying be successful.
That's all for this week. Tune in next week for another episode of Success Weekly. Do you have an idea you'd like James to talk about in an upcoming episode? Post your comments and be sure to share this podcast with friends.